welcome. I'm Asuma Kataoka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The U.S. State Envoy Steve Witkoff has now landed in Russia, marking a rare high-level engagement amid escalating tensions. The U.S. President Donald Trump has said a decision on Russian oil sanctions will be made following today's scheduled meeting between Steve Witkoff and Russian leadership in Moscow. The United Nations has expressed deep concern over media reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu favors a full military takeover of Gaza, warning that such an expansion could have catastrophic consequences. An Israeli minister blamed foreign critics for prolonging the war, while U.S. President Donald Trump refused to state his position on the possible takeover. President Donald Trump's administration has terminated 22 federal contracts for mRNA-based vaccines, citing safety concerns about the technology that played a key role in combating COVID-19. The move marks a significant shift in the U.S. vaccine policy and has sparked debate over scientific and public health implications. Today marks 80 years since the U.S. dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan, killing around 140,000 people. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres warned that nuclear weapons are being used as tools of coercion, while Taiwanese and Palestinian representatives joined for the first time, marking a record 120 countries attending the ceremony. But Russia and China were absent, with the U.S. being sent only its ambassador to the ceremony without issuing a formal apology. South Korean prosecutors interrogated former First Lady Kim Kyung-hee over stock manipulation, bribery, and election law violations, with an arrest warrant expected to follow. If granted, it would mark the first time in South Korean history that both a former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who's impeached over martial law declaration, and First Lady are both arrested. Australia's e-safety commissioner has accused tech giants, including YouTube and Apple, of turning a blind eye to child sex abuse material, citing their failure to track reports or response in needed times. The watchdog's report highlighted significant child safety gaps, while YouTube claimed proactively removes over 99% of such content. Southern China is battling deadly floods as disease risks as monsoon rains peak, with Guangzhou hit by its second heaviest August rainfall this century, causing massive travel disruptions and landslides. At least 16 rivers in Guangdong have risen to dangerous levels, prompting emergency rescue efforts amid warnings of more thunderstorms. While holding a press conference yesterday, U.S. President Donald Trump was caught off guard after he was asked about India's rebuttal to his criticism of New Delhi's decision to continue purchasing Russian oil despite his tariff threats. While taking questions from the media, President Trump was asked about India calling out the U.S. imports of Russian uranium and chemical fertilizers. The U.S. president denied having any knowledge of the Russian imports to the U.S. Let's take a closer look at what he had to say.
The U.S. imports Russian uranium, chemicals, fertilizers, while criticizing their energy imports. Your response to that, sir?
I don't know anything about it. I'd have to check, but we'll get back to you on that. Yeah, please.
Meanwhile, Nikki Haley, an American politician and diplomat, said that while Trump has said that India should not be buying oil from Russia, China, who is the adversary and the #1 buyer of Russian and Iranian oil, got a 90-day tariff pause from the U.S. She also noted that granting China such a pass could risk damaging relations with a strong ally like India. This moment comes after New Delhi responded to the president's threat to substantially increase tariffs for its ties with Moscow in an escalation in India-U.S. trade war. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Jaijit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, given India's rebuttal to President Trump's criticism over oil purchases, how might this affect future US-India trade relations?
I think we're going through a phase where it seems that US appears to be deliberately undermining the relationship, which had gone under a reset in the last 2.5 decades. We were slowly normalizing the ties, if I can call it normalizing, between US and India, because there has been a series of affronts from an Indian perspective that US has been putting on India in terms of security challenges that US had put on India. And now we see that it's coming back to the same situation rather than from an economic front, which is the tariffs being put in terms of accusing India of something which is unfair because the same way that US is importing from Russia, so is US importing from Russia. And when that's being put up to the US administration, if they are claiming that they're not aware of it, it's little difficult to understand why, because a nation as big and powerful and the largest economy of the world, when they're taking up disruptive policies, they should have done their background check, their homework. And if they are blaming India or accusing India of fueling war, well, the key ingredients of war, which is money, which is weapons, is being poured in by the West. Most of the trade is actually happening with the West. In fact, some of the oil that India is buying is actually getting refined and eventually being bought by the West. So both direct and indirect trade by the Western countries, including the US, with Russia, has been quite significant. Has been much more than what India has been doing. In addition, if you look at the calorific value of the uranium, the enriched uranium that the US has been purchasing from Russia, that's equivalent to 800 million barrels of oil. And India is importing only 600 million barrels of oil. So even from a pure energy prism, the US is importing much more energy from Russia than what India is doing. And we are not even adding to it what China is importing, which is what Tulsi Gabbard talked about, that China is importing much more. And the challenges between US and China are far more significant. So why is India being signaled out? In addition, EU is also importing a very significant amount of their energy from Russia, in addition to all kinds of other imports from Russia. So why this singling out and this continuous pressure on India seems to be emanating from not an economic discussion, but maybe a larger geopolitical shift. Also in the background has been the US supporting terrorism in this part of the world, wherein when we had similar terrorism case in the Middle East, the US has been supporting an act which has led to large amount of deaths happening in Gaza and West Bank that we are talking about. However, in India, there was a surgical, precise military response, and the US went against that and did not support it in their utterances, and not directly, but in terms of equating the terrorism with the victim. So in that larger context, we find it that the US is actually drifting away from India, and therefore this pronouncement of singling out India just seems to be an emanation of a larger US policy of drifting away from India.
And also, given that how clueless he was about this President Trump's reaction, what do you make up of that? Do you think he was just avoiding that question, or his reaction was genuine?
Well, I wouldn't be knowing whether he did not know about the details or he was evading it, but clearly he did not answer it. He did not even say that if this is true, then they're wrong, that US is wrong in what they're doing. But given his past, questioning, he seems to be largely unaware of the details of any of the policy measures that has been taken up by his administration. So perhaps we can give him the benefit of doubt of ignorance. But that's a dangerous thing, because he's the leader of the most powerful economy and the most powerful military power on this planet. And ignorance is not really an excuse that can be taken up by a leader of such a powerful entity. So it's a very disconcerting issue that the whole world should be taking note of.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for joining us today, Jaijit Bhattacharya, and always sharing your insight. Now we move on to our next news. Israeli President Isaac Herzog has called on the international community not to engage with Hamas until all remaining hostages are released. Speaking in Riga alongside his Latvian counterpart, Herzog displayed images of hostages and said their condition is life-threatening. Let us listen in to what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say.
And I call upon the international community from Riga for a change. How about presenting a unanimous, tough position, including Europe, and saying to Hamas and its allies, we're not talking to you until you release the hostages.
This comes as at the United Nations Security Council, Ilay David, the brother of Israeli hostage Eviatar David, described the video released by Hamas, saying his brother looked like a living skeleton and had been forced to dig his own grave. He urged the council to use its leverage to secure the hostages' release. Let us listen into what Ilay David, the brother of Israeli hostage Eviatar David, had to say.
The last video also exposed another horrifying truth. As my younger brother, a living skeleton, was forced to speak and dig his future grave, you can see the chubby and well-fed hand of Hamas terrorists enter into the frame. Do not let them spend another minute in darkness, suffering beyond imagination. While we do our part, demanding from the Israeli government to do everything to save the hostages, all leaders should unite to pressure Hamas and its partners. Act now before it's too late.
Meanwhile, on the domestic front, in Tel Aviv, Israeli protesters blocked a main highway demanding a hostage deal and an end to the war in Gaza. Scuffles broke out as police attempted to remove demonstrators, calling the protest illegal. According to Israeli officials, 50 hostages remain in Gaza, with only 20 believed to be still alive. Hamas has so far barred humanitarian access to them. Now we are joined by Gedalia Blum. He's a Middle East affairs expert, joins us live from Eli, Israel. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, what are the broader implications of President Isaac Herzog's call for the international community to refrain from engaging with Hamas until all hostages are released?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I would actually say that President Herzog's message has been the same message from the beginning. While in the past he has been leading left and he's now a president in a right-wing government, he has been apolitical and a uniter of the people of Israel. And the message is really of desperation, is wondering what exactly is the international community actually thinking? What kind of deals are they trying to broker? What kind of peace are they looking to have? Whereas the Hamas regime that was voted in, and right after being voted in, went to dispose of their political rivals, the Palestinian Authority officials, by throwing them off the rooftops. Now, these are people that are holding their own people hostage. They are creating a fear society, a terror society, that the people of Gaza are not free. They're not free. There's no freedom of expression. There's no freedom of not only movement outside of Gaza, but certainly within Gaza. And some ways, police come and arrest their own people, torture them. And so for some reason, this desperation from the president is really a desperation of not what the expectations are that we have for Hamas, but what we have from the world, the Western world, who purports to stand for liberal democracies, for freedom. And what they're actually doing is by calling for a ceasefire, by trying to broker a deal with Hamas, is that they're actually giving them more power. They're showing them that they have a lot of leverage, and there's no reason for Hamas to speak anymore. Now, I will say this. I think that the number one issue that should have been at the forefront on October 7th, October 8th, and I'll say this, I think that this is the responsibility and the fault of Israel. We should have maintained a very clear message to the international community. You must open up the borders of Gaza to Egypt and open up a humanitarian corridor and allow civilians to leave so Israel could prosecute a clean and fast war. We're almost 2 years into this war. Hamas, we all know that, has been embedded into civilian populations from day one. From the times that they ended up taking power, they started shooting tens of thousands of rockets from schools, kindergartens, from hospitals into Israeli civilian populations. The world knew this. The world knew that Hamas was building terror tunnels. They knew that they had more terror tunnels than the New York City subway system. Now, when they saw what happened after the massacre of October 7th, the world should have said right away, Israel's going to retaliate. They're going to retaliate hard, as like anybody else would. We had tremendous amount of support around the world, yet not one government leader, not one NGO, not one UN agency ever called for the removal of civilians from the battlefield. In fact, the Palestinians in Gaza and also throughout Judea and Samaria have their own UN refugee agency called UNRWA. UNRWA's mandate is to protect its people, is to have programs, refugee programs. They have not once called for a humanitarian corridor to allow civilians to exit Gaza. So now we're really in this predicament where we're in a no-win situation because, of course, we want our hostages back. And you hear that after months and months and months and a couple of years of trying to negotiate with Hamas, we know that there's no negotiating with Hamas. But I believe that the negotiations from the Israeli side were from domestic pressure, from the Hostage Family Forum, and also the international community. But I think anybody who understands the situation knows that Hamas is willing to let all of Gaza burn and be destroyed as long as they are able to remain in power. And so once they give up their last hostage, they have no more leverage against Israel. And they know that that will be their last day, because they know that we love life. Even one hostage is worth continuing to fight and to sacrifice our soldiers on the ground in order to get them back. On the other side, Hamas is willing to allow the whole population of Gaza become destroyed.
We are running short in time for this discussion, but thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your insight all the way from Israel. Now we move on. Canada will provide to $870 million to help softwood lumber producers deal with U.S. countervailing and anti-dumping duties, according to Prime Minister Mark Carney. Carney has said that Ottawa would make up to around $508 million available in loan guarantees and also provide about $363 million to help speed product development and market diversification. Here's what the Canadian Prime Minister had to say.
Today I'm announcing a series of new measures to help the softwood lumber industry pivot to a growing Canadian market and to the markets of reliable trading partners around the world. The first pillar is to give our companies that need liquidity, that liquidity in order to address immediate pressures. To do so, we'll provide up to $700 million in loan guarantees. This will ensure that forestry companies of all sizes have the competitive financing they need to maintain and restructure, if necessary, their operations during a period of profound transformation. Second, to make the softwood lumber industry more competitive for the long term, we will provide an additional $500 million, largely in grants and contributions to supercharge new product development and new market diversification.
This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump hiked tariffs on some Canadian imports to 35% last week after negotiations failed to meet an August 1st deadline. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has met with Canada's finance minister and foreign affairs minister. According to Sheinbaum, Canada and Mexico are strengthening the relationship between their countries. Mexican Economy Minister Marcelo Ebrard also said that he is set to speak with Canada's finance minister about the two countries' experiences in dealing with tariffs imposed on goods shipped to the United States. Here's what Mexican Economy Minister had to say.
Como ustedes saben, tenemos ahora una visita a la presidenta. No está el secretario de Economía, pero sí voy a conversar con el ministro Champagne, que además es un buen amigo, y quedamos de vernos precisamente para ver las diferentes perspectivas. Ellos están pagando ya un arancel de 35% y México no. Entonces, pues vamos a intercambiar experiencias. Ellos quieren saber cómo está México llevando a esos resultados. Entonces, hoy voy a platicar.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Jayjit, for staying with us. Now, how effective will Canada's $870 million support package be in mitigating this impact from the U.S. Tariffs? And what are the potential long-term effects on Canadian producers for this?
The timber industry is very critical for the Canadian economy. It feeds into multiple industries, not just timber per se, but even things like man-made fiber, which then goes into things like clothes. Much of this timber is used for not just building, but many other things, furniture, man-made fiber, and so on and so forth. It gives employment to at least 50,000 people directly in Canada, so it's very, very significant from a Canadian perspective. So it is necessary that the Canadian government did something about the impact of the US tariffs on the Canadian timber. Having said that, when they're putting in $700 million, it will actually tantamount to subsidies from a WTO perspective. If WTO still exists, that's a different issue altogether. But under the World Trade Organization, the rules, it'll fall under a violation of subsidies. But I guess the Canadian government has to do what it has to do because the jobs are in line, the Canadian economy is in line, and it's going to lead to significant amount of disruption. The Canadian government has to find alternate uses of timber as well as alternate markets, which can compensate for the loss of the tremendously large market that the US provided to Canada. And therefore, this is a necessary step from a Canadian perspective, albeit a very complex step.
Yes, thank you very much, Jayjit Bhattacharya, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Lebanon's cabinet has tasked the army with preparing a plan to monopolize arms across the country before the end of the year in a direct challenge to Hezbollah. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said the plan will ensure that all weapons in the country are limited to 6 state security agencies. Let's listen into what the Lebanese Prime Minister had to say.
تكليف الجيش اللبناني وضع خطة تطبيقية لحصر السلاح قبل نهاية العام الحالي بيد الجهات المحددة في إعلان الترتيبات الخاصة بوقف الأعمال العدائية وحدها وعرضها على مجلس الوزراء قبل 31 من الشهر الجاري لنقاشها وإقرارها.
The move comes amid growing U.S. pressure on Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, which continues to maintain a powerful arsenal outside state control. In a televised speech, Hezbollah deputy leader Naim Qassem said the group would not accept a timetable to disarm. He said the matter of Hezbollah's arms should be decided only through consensus and rejected what he called external dictates. Qassem warned that if Israel resumes a broader war on Lebanon, rockets would fall on Israel. He added that Lebanon must first implement the existing ceasefire agreement before any further talks can take place, and said the group had not agreed to any new deal. Let's listen into what Hezbollah's chief Naim Qassem had to say.
علاقة بلبنان أي جدول زمني يعرض لينفذ تحت سقف العدوان الإسرائيلي لا يمكن أن نوافق عليه. على الدولة أن تضع خططاً لمواجهة الضغط والتهديد وتأمين الحماية، لا أن تجرد مواطنيها من قدرتهم وقوتهم وتجرد مقاومتها من قدرتها وقوتها
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Selina Ryan. She's a political analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Selina, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, given Lebanon's complex political and sectarian makeup, what challenges could the Lebanese government face in implementing this plan?
Hi, first of all, thank you for having me. So the meeting yesterday was, we can say, historical. It lasted for over 4 hours, the government meeting on which the main topic was disarming Hezbollah. As we all know, Hezbollah has been the biggest non-state army like for the past 2 decades in the world. And now it's very hard for them to accept that their reign, we can call it a reign, it's coming to an end. We saw yesterday the desperation in Naim Qasim's speech, and we also saw folding and loss, because he also said in his speech yesterday that during the war last year between Israel and Lebanon, Hezbollah has lost over 5,000 operatives, and 13,000 were injured. That's like a total of 18,000 fighters, plus all the targeted attacks that Israel has been doing since the ceasefire with Lebanon, which is around 250 operatives, a lot of them in the leadership ranks. So Hezbollah, I don't think is a threat to the region or to Lebanon, and I think the Lebanon is, for the first time after a long time, after decades of internal and international conflict and regional conflict with Israel, is seeing a new future, a peaceful future, and a future where they develop and they can have a good economy and industry, and they can rise up to the glory that they had a few decades ago. So basically what was sort of established yesterday is that Nawaf Salam, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, gave a directive to the army to develop a plan by the end of the month, which is supposed to be implemented by the end of the year to disarm Hezbollah. In terms of threats that they can face, me personally, I don't think Hezbollah is in a position right now to do anything, to react in any way. They can only do this at the level of speech, verbally. I don't think they have the manpower, the logistics, the leadership, as most of them have been eliminated, to act. They are not organized, and also they don't have, because of the fact that their financial ties with Syria and Iran were cut, they're in very big financial difficulties. Hezbollah cannot really operate anymore in any way at any level. So I don't think that the government would face a big threat or a big challenge in disarming Hezbollah.
And do you think that, just as we are running short in time, just a quick answer would be appreciated. Do you think, Selina, that other countries in Middle East might follow, such as Syria, which has a lot of arms like this? Do you think they might follow this Lebanon's move?
I'm not sure I get your question. What move exactly? Sorry.
So Hezbollah in Lebanon are asked to disarm and give up their arms, right? So do you think other countries across Lebanon or Middle East, like Syria, do you think they might follow such move in unarming other agencies within their country?
So Syria right now, the state government is having a challenge with the tribes that are armed and they're not under state sovereignty, like the Bedouin tribes, the Druze, and it's the scene in Syria is very different at all levels. You cannot compare it. There's no other army being formed in Syria or already existing in Syria at the level of Hezbollah. So no, I think the goal already for all the countries in the Middle East, we see this in Iraq, we also see it in Syria, the goal is for the arms to be in the hands of the state, like it's supposed to be, I think, in the hands of the leadership, with no other small actors on the side that can undermine the interests of the country.
Right. Thank you very much, Selina Ryan, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a political analyst. Now, well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.